Hey, it's Fitz, and I just wanted to thank you for checking out the Rock Radio podcast. I wanted to do a little plug for my own company here, RockVox Recording and Production. If you have any needs for podcasting or video production or voiceover, look no further than RockVox Recording and Production. You can find us at rockvox.com or the social media platform of your choice. A full-service podcast and video podcast studio at your fingertips right here in Bushnell's Basin, just a short drive from the city of Rochester. Check us out, rockvox.com. Welcome back to the Rock Radio podcast, where I talk to the movers and shakers and people that really made Rochester radio what it is today. And I have a very, very special guest that I actually ended up meeting sort of out of happenstance, but Ted Nixon is here with me this morning. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning, Scott. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And you, I did not know this when I met you at the time, but it turns out you were quite an instrumental man in the history of Rochester radio.
Well, certainly things changed after we came to town in 1980.
So when you say we came to town in 1980, what is that?
Well, my partners and I had a company, and it was called Sconix Broadcasting. The Nix in Sconix was for Nixon.
I gotcha.
The Ska in Sconix was for Scott McQueen. And then along the way, we were the two founders, and then along the way we added Randy O'Donnell, and he didn't get represented there, except that, you could say that the O and the N in the middle of it could be O'Donnell.
Right.
But that's where Sconix came from. So we came to town. We had been in business since 1969, operating little stations in Vermont and central New York, New Hampshire. And this was our biggest market to date coming into Rochester.
And so where were you coming from?
Well, I was living in Oneonta at the time.
Okay,
we owned WDOS and WSRK down in Oneonta. But that was the era of huge interest rates, prime rates at 22%. Wow. And we ended up having to sell off Oneonta to pay for our interest costs. But we were able to leverage it before we did and come into town here.
Yeah, see, when you start talking about all that stuff, that's when I glaze over. You start talking about microphones, I'll follow you, but you start talking about the finance part. But that's an interesting part of radio, and it's a part that I don't really understand or know much about, and I know a lot of people also don't know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you in that, and I've just, so many people have said so many nice things about you. And plus, I know you, so.
Well, there you go, and you're not bad-mouthing me, so that's good.
That's right. Never. So how did you, because, I mean, you have the radio voice, you have a broadcaster's sensibilities. How did you get into the broadcasting?
Right. Well, I always, business? As a kid, I mean, and this is true of most people that go into radio, as a kid, I became fascinated with the relationships that are built between radio announcers and their audience, the individual listener, really. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I knew all the announcers on KDWB and WDGY. Those were the rock stations, both AM at the time. And tell you a funny story. KDWB was the up-and-coming lower power signal licensed to St. Paul, and WDGY was the big powerhouse AM rock station, and KDWB managed to overthrow them, and I witnessed how they did it. And it was fascinating, and we used a lot of the same kinds of techniques on WCMF here in town that KDWB used in Minneapolis years and years before.
Interesting.
It was the David and Goliath syndrome.
So go a little bit more into that.
Yeah, well, the thing about being on top is you have a lot of flanks to defend.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to run an insurrection against the leader than it is to defend your position, really, because you're trying to hold on. And that's can be tough to do in radio. And we found well, first off, KDWB found that WDGY was very much kind of removed from their audience. And KDWB became kind of the insurgent, and they had slightly more irreverent jocks.
The scrappy upstarts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was funny because we hired one of them at our, this will give you an idea, hired one of them at a dance that we had my senior year at West High School in Minneapolis, 1963. And this guy named Ken Murray, who did the morning show on KDWB, came over. And we had a principal at the school who was a total jerk named Frank Janes. And Frank goes up to Murray and says, okay, you got to be off by 9 o'clock. So Murray starts his song. And those weren't long songs in those days, but it was going to run over. So Frank Janes goes over and pulls the plug.
Oh, he's not one of those. That's like
he pulls the plug. So Murray is really unhappy. So they end up literally getting into a fist fight in the parking lot outside of West High School. And Frank Janes comes in on Monday morning and his face is all bruised up. And I said, there you go.
That's
Ken
why you
Murray.
wanted to be in radio, because the morning guy kicked the crap out of your principal.
Boy, maybe, something there. I'm not sure what.
The strength of radio.
Wow.
That's a great story. So you're in high school. Is that when you decided you were going to go to college and go?
I went to college at Dartmouth, and the first thing I joined was the college radio station. And WDCR was the oldest completely student-operated college radio station in the country. So had been doing it for a long time. And they did block programming, hour at a time. And I got assigned to the classical music show. Of course, I knew nothing. And
so that's how it worked. You just got assigned
you got assigned a shift because you were, learning.
Yeah.
I was appalled at how bad I was. And to tell you, this is a story I don't tell very often, but I identified Chopin as the composer of this piece, and
followed by
I got a nice
Beethoven,
a friendly call from a listener. That's pronounced Chopin.
Chopin.
I don't know.
It's Chad Nixon, and we're listening to Chopin.
I was from Minneapolis. What did I know?
That's great. So how did it go there when you were in college? I have such fond memories of college radio.
I really loved it. I worked my way up to music till midnight, from 11:15 after the news till midnight, and this was the in rock show. And I did a lot of themes. One that sticks out, which is kind of funny in retrospect, is I did a theme on the non-evolution of George Harrison's music.
The non-evolution.
Yeah, now this is in 1965 or 6, okay? And so George Harrison's music hadn't evolved much at that point. They all had the same beat, blah, 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 blah. But it turns out, he turned into an incredible music composer.
Right. You can give enough time.
No.
You just needed some more time.
Exactly. And here I am, non-evolution of George Harrison. That's almost as bad as Chopin.
So Dartmouth.
Yes.
It's very
well, I went out and I played freshman basketball and freshman baseball. And then I quit basketball because I wanted to concentrate on baseball. Thought I might have a future in it. And I played it as a sophomore and got hurt. Actually was having a great season. And then I got into a row with my coach in my junior year, and I quit.
Wow.
And the night that I quit, I was down in the bar at my fraternity, and this young woman walks in, and she's dating a guy who became my roommate a little bit later. And she introduces herself, and she says, "What are you doing here drinking by yourself on Wednesday night?" And I said, "Well, I quit the baseball team, blah, blah, blah." And I ended up marrying her, and we've been married for 51 years.
Wow. That's a great story.
So, one thing leads to another, and you never know when it's going to happen.
That's true.
And it happened that night, and we didn't go out for another 14 months. But
that
you
was,
know, we had made our contact.
that's awesome.
So, and then, of course, when I don't have baseball to play, I spent all my time when I wasn't studying, which was significant, on the radio station.
Were you a communications major?
Nope, I was a history major,
Oh, nice.
and I did evolve into doing play-by-play, various sports, basketball, football, and baseball at Dartmouth on the radio station, and which I loved. I loved doing that.
Yeah, play-by-play is a lot of fun. Well, you know, if you know what you're doing. I
Right.
don't. I'm not a sports guy, and I've had too many opportunities to do play-by-play and just sound like a complete imbecile. So I have a lot of respect for those that can do it. It's definitely an art to doing that properly.
It's fun. I really enjoyed it. Got to travel around all the other Ivies.
Yeah.
And I took that into when we actually bought a station in Randolph, Vermont, which was our first station. We did the Norwich Academy games, and I did those also.
So I don't want to skip ahead. So what did you, after you graduated from Dartmouth, did you go right into radio?
I did.
What
got
was
my
your first
job? It was as a program director at WKBK in Keene, New Hampshire.
You started right off the bat as a PD?
Yeah, yeah,
Look at you.
yeah. There you go. It was a glory
Was
job,
that
I'll
what
tell
you wanted to do? Did you want to go into management, or did you want to, or was it an on-air?
It was an
PD?
on-air
Okay.
PD.
Yeah.
And that was 68. That was lots of stuff, lots of great music
Now,
in that days.
were you a cool PD?
I don't know.
Because the PD is always the enemy, right? You know,
I was
that's
one of
from
the troops, though.
Well, see, that's the thing is you're coming up from, you went right into it.
Yeah.
So I wonder what people would say if you know, the jocks that were under you at the time. If I said, what was Ted Nixon like
I
as a
don't know.
PD?
I don't know.
I mean, it's hard to judge that.
It really is. I mean, I was working a lot of hours. You know, I'll tell you what the highlight of my time at KBK was. Apple Records released their first songs, and I had a pretty good relationship with the Capitol rep, and they had an event down in Boston for the release of the Beatles songs, and it was Hey Jude on one side and Revolution on the other side. And he gave me a complete catalog of all the Beatles Capitol records as a gift. You know, I'm sure he figured I don't know why he did it, but he did it. And I mean, the Beatles were not there, but it was kind of a highlight to you know, be rubbing shoulders with all these PDs from Boston and other big markets. And here I am in Keene.
So here's a question for you. Now, I'm sure being a PD in this day and age is vastly different from when you were a PD. What was your philosophy about your log, about your playlist and all of that? How much freedom did your jocks have to play music?
They didn't have any.
Zero.
I you know, came up with a playlist, and that's what they played.
And it was a rock station?
Yep.
So how did you design your playlist?
Took a look at adding, I don't know, however many good records there were to add every week. And that was not a lot, but it might have been 3 to 7, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you replaced the old ones and, you know, brought them in.
So did you look at other stations that were doing what you're doing in different markets?
Yes, that's what I did.
You know,
I did. And then of course, the reps would call me up from very, can you add this? Can you add this, Ted? You know, they wanted to be able to show that X number of stations had added their song, their record. It didn't really matter particularly to them whether it was Keene, New Hampshire station or Boston, Massachusetts station. It was a list.
All right, so it was a number of stations as opposed to markets and things like that.
So it was interesting. The thing, again, I have certain memories about it, and that was one. And another one is that was the era of the first really long records. And, of course, Hey Jude was one of them. But the one that I used to make bathroom visits, because, you know, nobody, was MacArthur Park. which was 7 minutes plus.
That's hilarious. Boy, that's so funny because when I was in college, there was a song that was by Smashing Pumpkins that I used to specifically put on to either go use the bathroom or have breakfast.
There you go. Same idea.
Yeah. Things never change.
That's right.
So did you continue to stay in management from there?
What happened was Vietnam was looming at this point. I was running like mad to get into the New Hampshire National Guard. Scott McQueen, my partner, was already in, and he said he had contacts. And so I contacted people in Lebanon, New Hampshire, which is the unit he was in. And they got me in touch with a unit in Concord, New Hampshire, which was a 5-person unit, 2 officers, 3 enlisted men. And the 3 enlisted men, one of them was a radio guy. Okay. And he was going to be getting out in about a year. And the commanding officer in this 5-man unit calls me up and says, listen, we'd like to replace you, bring you in to replace this guy. And I said, absolutely. So I was moved into this unit. The guy was moved out a year. They sent him into a different, bigger unit. And I got into this position. And that gave me some room to operate because I wasn't activated until the end of October in 1969. So I leave Keene to join Scott, who is working as a consultant for a little tiny station in Randolph, Vermont. And he says to me, come on up here. This will be great. We'll have fun. The owner is this rich guy by New Hampshire standards, who owns the station. He's really angry because he's had it for 6 months and he's still losing money. Okay, this guy was a bottom line guy. And so we went up there, and he hired us for a 6-week consultancy, $125 each a week. And we looked around and discovered that one of the reasons he was losing money was because his manager was stealing from him.
Oops.
So he fired his manager and hired us as managers.
Wow.
And we turned it around in about 3 months, got it profitable, and went to him in 6 months and said, listen, we want you to sell us the radio station. And if you don't, we're going to leave, and then you'll be right back where you started. And he sold it to us.
Wow. Cutthroat.
$100,000 is what it cost us, okay? $25,000 down, and the rest paid out over whatever. And the thing was so successful that we got our $25,000 down, and it paid for itself out of cash flow.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so, and of course, Scott and I each had to come up with $12,500, and he had money and I did not. And I had $500 actually in the bank after coming out of college and working in Keene. And so I had to raise it. And I went to my father, and my father lent me $5,000. I went to an uncle who had a lot of money. He lent me $2,500. And the bank threw in whatever the difference was. Oh, no, he put in $2,000. The bank threw in $3,000, and I threw in my $500, and that was my $12,500.
Wow.
And that was it. And, of course, when you don't have anything, there's nothing to lose.
Right.
As Bob Dylan once said, right. When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. And I had nothing to lose. And at that point, I was single. Ended up getting married in 1970. And to the woman I met in the fraternity bar.
Now, was Scott McQueen, was he your college roommate?
No, he was just my college friend. Randy O'Neill was my college roommate my junior year.
Okay.
So
wow. So you went right into ownership.
Right into
Now, were you doing any on-air stuff during ownership?
Oh, yeah, I was doing every day.
Yeah?
I did the 9 to 12.
Owner-operator.
9 to 12 shift. Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, and then I'd go out and sell advertisements.
So it was just like a small staff. It was just a few of you.
It was just a few of us. Yeah, exactly. And we would broadcast anything if we could sell it. We even radio broadcast snowmobile races. Okay, now snowmobile races, they have these huge things where they go off into the woods
Right.
for like 10 minutes at a time and then swing back around and go by you in 30 seconds. Okay, so that's what you see. Now, can you imagine making that interesting?
So you have to like basically make it all up for that whole time that they're in the woods.
Right,
Well, that
exactly.
could be really fun.
It was hilarious.
What were the numbers for those broadcasts? Did they do well?
Yeah, there were no numbers.
Well,
if
yeah.
you could sell it, it was good. If
So-
you couldn't sell it, it wasn't.
So sell, because there were no ratings. Was
No
there
ratings,
So
no ratings.
it was basically if you could go out and convince someone to give you money to sponsor that show, you really had no way of knowing how well it did, except for word of mouth or response when people called.
That's it. That's
you
it.
know,
And in a small town or group of small towns like that, that can work.
yeah.
It's very, very basic one-on-one communication, and it is, in a lot of ways, it's exciting. It's really fun, to come up with the next idea that
Sure.
is of interest. It was a lot of fun. Totally different than, when you get into a market where you're rated. When you operate differently.
Yeah. So when you were doing this, you're having a blast. You've got your radio station that you own, and you're also on the air, and you're wearing all the hats.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you think, I want more?
I think that when I moved to Oneonta, in between Randolph, there was Springfield, Vermont, which I loved. And then we moved to Oneonta. My wife cried for weeks because she had all these friends in Springfield.
I've heard that when people move to Oneonta, they cry for weeks.
It was not a welcoming place for us. I'm not quite sure if anybody else experienced that. But
Really?
I found Oneonta to be, in our experience, two main groups. There were the townies, the people who had been there forever. They had relatives that go back 18 generations.
Right.
And then there were the college folks. And you have two universities in Oneonta. You have State University of College of Oneonta, and then you have Hartwick College. And those people had their own friends,
Yeah.
and the townies had their own friends, and we were like not in anybody's group.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really their fault. It's just that, where did we fit in? We really, we didn't particularly.
Yeah.
And so that kind of emphasized that, stranger feeling. So Kathy was not at all unhappy, nor was I, to move to Rochester. I'll tell you an interesting story about moving to Rochester. We knew we wanted to do it. And before we settled on CMF, we actually were looking at the Rust stations in town. Bill Rust, which is HAM, HFM. And there had been rumors that he was talking about spinning off the FM. He really was an old AM guy. Mm-hmm. And so we went and visited him out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where he had this huge estate. And we visited and spent an evening with him, and he was regaling us with all these stories. And he was a really interesting guy. But it became clear that he was not going to sell the radio stations. So then we moved on and settled on CMF.
So you were in Oneonta and you were looking to buy in Rochester.
Yeah.
Well, what was your draw to Rochester?
It's a really controllable market. Very few radio stations at the time relative to the size of the population.
And this is in
1980 is when we
so
came to
Kodak and Xerox and everything are still kind of in
very
their
strong,
glory.
huge.
Yeah.
It was an extremely profitable market to be in.
Yeah.
I mean, we identified that early on. It really was.
So your company, you with McQueen and O'Donnell came to Rochester, and the first thing you bought was CMF. Did you buy a few stations? Was it a cluster? Or?
You can't do that. You
can't
couldn't do
oh,
that
that's
in those
right.
days.
That's right. You
You
couldn't
could
do
own
that.
7 AMs, 7 FMs, and 7 TVs nationwide. Now, we weren't doing TV. We do 7 AMs and 7 FMs, and that was about our, I don't know, 4th or 5th FM that we would have had, because we also bought in Charleston, South Carolina at the same time.
Okay. So at this point,
Randy went to South Carolina. I came here. Scott was in Laconia, New Hampshire.
Okay, so you were all split up running the stations wherever you were at.
Correct.
And at that point, you had how many stations? Were you at your limit?
No, not quite. No, I think I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and think. Around 5
Okay.
FMs and slightly less AMs. Mostly they were AM FM combos, but not entirely.
So what was going on with CMF when?
Well, it was interesting. CMF was a station that had been on the air for a long time, actually. It was owned by, it's kind of like public radio. It was owned by community members. And many, hundreds, were stockholders. And they initially had gone on and were a classical music station. And then
Playing Chopin and whatnot.
Yeah, and they playing Chopin. I was looking forward to doing that show. and they just couldn't quite settle on anything. And then they switched to a hard rock station format in, I'm thinking 77 maybe, 78, something like that. But they had two things going against them. One, their program director was a guy named Bernie Kimball, and he wanted to play everything that was ever recorded, and the more obscure, the better. And
My kind of guy.
And the other thing was that their signal was terrible. They were lower power, and they were halfway up on the same tower that WMJQ was on, okay? Except MJQ is way up. This is very symbolic. MJQ is way up top, and CMF was halfway down with half the power or less, and so their signal went nowhere. Okay, but the thing we found about it when we did our surveys of people's relating to CMF was people would say, "Oh, I loved that when I was in college. I used to hook up a coat hanger as an antenna in my closet and listen to it. It was great." He said, I don't listen to it anymore, but, I really love it.
Because it's too much work.
Yeah. It had great heart, people had attached
Loyalty.
to it. Loyalty.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't listen anymore.
Right.
And so we said, we can build on that.
Yeah.
We got to fix the signal, which we did. We relocated the antenna and put it up on Pinnacle Hill. It was at 20,000 watts. Now, 20,000 watts and 50,000 watts isn't that big a deal of a difference if you're high, okay? And Pinnacle Hill was where everybody was that had a full signal, and it was adequate, certainly better than adequate. So we fixed that. And the other thing we did was we came on with a format that made sense, and with positioning in the marketplace that made sense. WMJQ was the downright runaway leader. In the Arbitron, before we took over, they had an 11.8, okay, 12 plus, killing. And CMF had a 2.7. Okay, so you look at that. So
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
MJQ was top 40?
No, they had a format which was incredibly successful all over the country. It was
AOR?
Burkhardt, AOL, and it was Burkhardt Abrams' Superstar format. Okay. And they were kicking ass everywhere except one place, and that was Philadelphia. And there they were getting beaten by this local grassroots
Scrappy upstart.
So we got on the phone and called the program director, a guy named Jeff Pollock, and said, "Jeff, how are you doing this?" And, that started the conversation. And we ended up being Jeff Pollock's first consulting client, and he went on to huge success in the radio business. And his underling there was a guy named Trip Reeb, and Trip we hired to come into town to be our program director. He brought with him his wife, who was a woman named Maureen Maureen Flaherty, who was as good a jock as I've ever heard. And she did our afternoons. And we hired Dave Kane to do middays. And we hired Tony Matthews, now Tony Infantino,
Right.
to do mornings. So he was doing mornings over at MJQ. MJQ's image was soft, okay? Their big selling point was the Magic Moose, okay? Magic Moose is not rock and roll. Magic Moose is 12-year-old kids.
Right.
You know, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, except that it left them vulnerable. And so we came out with the positioning statement, long live rock.
Nice.
Okay. And we came out with jerseys, 3/4 length jerseys that had this design on the back on a wall, a la The Wall, long live rock, spray painted.
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very rock. Very, very street. Well, as it turns out, it filtered down to those 12 and 14-year-old kids. And there were literally CMF jersey days in the local high schools where everybody would wear their CMF jersey.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and that's what happens sometimes. The older kids influence the younger kids as far as
Yeah. What's trending?
Yeah, exactly. And so we were able to actually turn around the station and take the lead in 2 books, which is a year, less than a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And they hung on for a little while and then switched formats.
You know, I had Tony Infantino here talking about his career, and he mentioned, and actually we didn't talk about it on the podcast. We were talking about it afterwards, off mic. But he said, I said, oh, yeah, I got Ted Nixon coming in. He said, oh, I love Ted. He's like one of my favorite guys. He's like, you know what he used to do? He's like, on payday, he used to walk around and he used to hand out checks. And he'd hand you a check and say, thank you. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And that really hit me because that is that's rare. And I don't know if it was rare then or not. I assume it was because it's stuck in his mind. It's stuck in his mind as something that, all these years later, he still remembers fondly. And I think that's amazing because you were one of those guys. And I think you're kind of in that lost generation of station owners who, really come in and appreciate the talent and the hard work and everything. And that's just amazing.
Oh, thank you. I don't know when I started that, but I always did it. And I'm just the owner. I'm not the guy who is making it happen. But I was a young guy at that point, 33, 34 years old.
Yeah.
And so I was not all that much older than they were. And I appreciated what they were doing. They were the engine. I wasn't, but it sure was fun.
So how long did you have CMF?
About 3.5 years.
That's it.
Yeah. 1980 to late 1983.
And what happened there?
We
decide to sell? Or?
We decided to sell, and the reason we decided to sell, and this was not necessarily my first choice, but it's what happened. We were going to restructure the company, and we were going to take some money out personally, which we did. A sizable amount of money in those days, and then we were going to take the rest of that money that we restructured and buy some other stations around the country, a bunch of them. And so it was a major, major turning point for us. We used the leverage from CMF to take our money out, some money out personally, and redirect the rest. And in retrospect, that was good and bad for me. It certainly, I have money today that I made then that I never spent, which is just fine. That
Yeah.
And we kind of live off of that. We're working hard at spending it,
You don't have to work as hard spending it now as
No, you don't. It kind of flows out.
Yeah.
But it did allow us to buy some other stations. We ended up in Boston. We ended up in Kansas City. We ended up in Quad Cities and Florida, Fort Lauderdale.
Really?
Yeah.
What'd you own in Fort Lauderdale?
I forget the calls, but
I was in
Magic.
Magic 102.7.
That's it. Magic 102.
Because I'm from Florida.
Okay.
I grew up in Fort Lauderdale,
Yeah.
so the Miami Fort Lauderdale market was where I grew up listening and wanting to be in radio.
That was it. Magic 102.7.
So-
That was our station.
So and that was oldies then, right?
Yeah,
Or
it was-
doo-wop type of stuff, or was it not?
No, I don't think so. Not when I was involved with it. It was more of a
What was this in the mid to late 80s?
yeah.
Yeah, see, I was in high school, so I don't remember now. And there was a guy who was really famous that was on that station.
I didn't have a lot to do with that station. My responsibility was Kansas City, Quad Cities,
Okay. What's Quad Cities?
Davenport, Iowa, Moline, Illinois, East Moline, and Bettendorf.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't know.
Household names.
Yeah, I know.
So, but you still lived in Rochester?
I still lived in Rochester.
You just put roots down here, and that was...
Yeah, my wife refused to move.
Yeah.
She said, "This is it.
You
This
did that to me once. I'm not going to...
Not going to do this again. We are here, and you can travel, but I'm not moving.
And
the
you're
kids
raising-
are in school, and
How many kids did you
two.
raise? Two.
We had my son, who was born in 1972.
Oh, he's a year older than me.
Okay, yeah, he just is 49. He just turned 49.
Yeah.
And my daughter was born in 1975, and they're both living here now.
That's great.
My daughter went all over the world and came back when she had a kid because she needed help and wanted her kid to be around grandparents.
Sure.
So we could help out too, and which I love. And their son never went away. In fact, he took us to a concert last night to see Brian Wilson up at the Kodak Center.
Oh, yeah.
That was in celebration of our 50th anniversary, which we couldn't celebrate because of COVID.
Because of COVID. Well,
So,
happy anniversary.
you.
Belated, but
Thank you.
50 years.
Yeah, we're almost at 51 now.
Yeah.
Halloween.
Is your
Yeah.
your anniversary's on
Yeah,
Halloween? That's
yeah.
great.
Good and bad. I never forget it.
Right, exactly. Well, so that's really a storied career. At what point did you continue with radio station ownership until you retired?
Nope. I did it through 1991, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I had some health issues, and I decided it was time to, take some time off.
Yeah.
I've been going pretty straight for 25 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was time to, to rest and regroup. And so I did that and spent a couple of years playing golf and deciding that I was only going to get to be a 12 handicap and that wasn't going to pay the bills at all. So I decided I would do something else. And my son and I in the meantime, I had been taking French lessons from the head of the department over at Nazareth. He would come over to my house and sit in the den and we'd talk French. He'd talk French.
You'd
I
listen.
would do what I could do for an hour a week. And I did this for like 6 or 7 years. And I got to the point where I was okay. And my son says to me one day, we're in the car, he says, "Dad, why don't you become a French teacher?" I said, "You're kidding." And then I started thinking about it. And I said, maybe I could. So I asked this fellow, what would I need to do to get to be a French teacher? And he said, "Well, first off, you have to take some French courses. You've never taken a French course. So you got to go and do your undergraduate stuff." So I did that at Nazareth. I got the required number of credits. I don't remember what it was, 36 maybe. And then you have to do master's work to get your education master's. And so I did that. So I did them concurrently, and it took me 3 years. And at the end of that, I took a trip to France and spent a month over there just driving around, practicing.
Just talking to strangers?
Yeah, just talking to strangers.
Excuse me, where can I find the butter?
Yeah, that's right. Où est le beurre? It's there's no better way to learn a language than immerse yourself in
I
it.
agree 100%.
And I loved that. It was just so much fun. I ran, except for the one time I put in regular or diesel fuel into a regular car, and I limped back to my.
How do you say? Can you please call the fire department in French? Yeah.
And they exchanged the car. Yeah. They didn't charge me anything for it. And then I went back out and drove all over the country, and it was a blast. And then I came back and got hired, and I got hired to teach middle school at Churchville Chili. And I was 50 when I got hired, so my first teaching job was at 50 years old, and I guess they figured I could do it. It was funny because I got interviewed, and they had nobody there who spoke French. And so I go
so they didn't know if you were good or bad at it.
Exactly. So I go home.
Take your word for it.
I'm taking a nap. Okay. And I get this phone call. Now I'm half asleep when this phone, and it's the woman who speaks French. She starts speaking French to me. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, I was good enough to get hired. I think they were desperate. And the first year that I taught there, I taught actually 3 Spanish courses, which I wasn't authorized to teach, and 2 French courses. They got a waiver for me. And then after that, I taught only French.
Once you learn French, you know all the other
I'd taken Spanish
language.
in junior high school.
Right. You knew enough to teach junior high kids.
Exactly. I was 1 page ahead of them.
So that's when you became Mr. Nixon.
That was when I became Mr. Nixon.
So for context, Ted put out it was Mr. Nixon's Words of Wisdom, which you can find online and on Facebook and stuff, and anywhere you get podcasts. And it's all literally your words of wisdom. And tell me a little bit about how that came about.
The principal knew that I had been in the radio business, and I'd been teaching there it was the beginning of my 4th year of teaching. And he came to me and he said, would you be willing to read these pre-published words of wisdom that come to the school and that we bought for the school district because you have, experience reading on radio? So I said, no, I'd be happy to do that. So that's in September. Little under 3 months later, actually December 13th, we have a kid die in our school. He's an 8th grader. Brian Scipione was his name.
That's tough.
And it was terrible. He had been in school on Tuesday. Wednesday wasn't feeling well.
Yeah.
Friday he died from meningitis.
Oh.
So principal calls me and says, Ted, can you write up something to comfort and console and
right.
I mean, why me? You know? I mean, I'm...
You're the radio guy.
Yeah, I'm a radio guy. But
you're a communicator.
No. So anyway, I said I would. And I went to a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner. And I read it, see what he had to say. He had written it on the death of his 14-year-old son. So, I mean, it was about as applicable as it could be.
Yeah.
And I essentially just used a couple of long quotes of his. And one of them being, can you forgive life for not being perfect? Because it's the only life we have.
Yeah.
And it was very moving. The staff thanked me for it. They had me read the message over the PA system to the community. And afterwards, the principal goes up to me and says, how about if you just keep writing these things? And I said, I'll try. I'll do it. I'll give it a shot. And for the next 8.5, almost 9 years, I wrote 2 of these things a week to the school community and talking about values and what's important and what's meaningful. And and that became Mr. Nixon's Words of Wisdom. And the end of each of these little things, I would say, this is Mr. Nixon, a little something to think about. And that was straight out of radio. You had to have a tag.
Right.
Paul Harvey, good day.
That's great, though.
Yeah.
I did. It's amazing that you were able to. You really reinvented yourself.
I did. I didn't have I suppose I had a choice, but I was very, very lucky and fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Around supportive people in my life. I have lots of good friends that encourage me, and a wife and family that encourages me. So, I feel very, very fortunate, and it's worked out great. It's I think I'm lucky. I'm very lucky to have been able to do two entirely different careers, and yet be satisfied in both of them at their proper time.
Yeah. And as far as radio is concerned today, and I know you're not in the business, but you can see it. What are your feelings about where it's gone? And I know that it's kind of pointless to talk about. It was going to go this way. It was going to, technology and everything brought it to where it is and stuff. But what do you see?
I have to say that I certainly saw the advent of satellite radio years and years ago. Figured that was going to be a game changer. I did not at the time foresee the companies owning thousands of radio stations or TV stations.
Right. Yeah. The law change didn't.
Law changed in late '80s, actually. And, it just totally changed the way things operated. Takes all of the control out of the hands of the local people and puts it into the corporate somewhere.
Yeah.
Texas, for example.
Yeah, I mean that's the part that irks me, and I wasn't really in the business long enough to have to be able to have a real opinion. But what I see is the community connection is going away because there's some guy, like you said, in a corporate office somewhere, thousands of miles away, making a decision about the programming that's happening in this town that he's probably never been to or will ever go to.
Yeah, at CMF, if the program director had a thought about something he wanted to do, all he had to do was get up, walk down the hall,
right,
and we'd sit down in my office,
and
make the decision, thrash it out, and make the decision. Wow, that is so totally different than what's going on right now.
Did you, when you were at CMF, did you have a title of like a general manager, or
I was the general manager.
Okay. So that's what it was. It was go down, talk to the GM, but you were also the owner too.
Yeah,
so
right.
If it was, unless it was anything really big and you had to confer with your partners, most of the decisions you can make on the spot.
Yeah. Before we leave the CMF thing, just want a couple of real highlights there.
Yeah.
One was Duke Jupiter. Okay. They recorded a song which became huge. And this was in '82. It's called "I'll Drink to You." Okay, I don't know if you've heard it.
I have.
Okay, and just by happenstance, we had booked them in to do a concert in the park up at Charlotte Beach in August. This thing was massive, and it was unbelievable. That had the largest traffic jam in the history of. We had told the Parks Department that it was going to be maybe 1,000 people. Well, I mean, it was immense. My mother was out for it, and we had to park like 2 miles away to walk to the beach to hear Duke Jupiter. And anyway, it was a massive event that totally cemented CMF's position in the marketplace. That was it.
That was the
overdone. It's over. MJQ ended up changing. They're now BEE. That's the dial position they inhabit. And the other was on a whole lot more solemn note. But again, it had the same effect. And that was on December 10th, 1980. John Lennon was shot and killed outside the Dakota. And the next day we had a candlelight vigil for him in what is now Martin Luther King Park downtown. And again, that was an event that said WCMF, it has their finger on the pulse of what this radio station, what this market is all about.
Yeah.
John Lennon, you don't get any, and we didn't do it for that reason, but that's how it worked out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have to say that me not being from here, not growing up here, for the short time that I got to work at CMF while it was owned by Entercom, which is now Odyssey, I knew of its impact. I knew of its importance in the community, and I was so grateful to be able to go in and where I did some producing on the morning show. I got to fill in for Kano, who was a legend. Kano was on the show here. And, so I knew the significance of CMF, even not being from here. So, I guess we have you to thank. We have you and your team from that time to thank for creating the station and the legacy for what it is now.
We had some really, really good people.
Yeah. And
it was a perfect example of hiring the right people and letting them do their thing.
There you go.
And that's what it was, and it worked great. It worked really, really well. And it was a lot of fun, and it lasted and lasted. And, Dave Kane just retired.
Yep. Well, the ownership thing has always been a sore spot for a lot of different people, and I think just as a radio person, that's always the worry. Someone's gonna buy it and flip it, and do whatever they do. I wasn't in it long enough to have to worry about that too much, but from what everyone tells me, from what I've heard from a lot of people that have worked with you, that you were definitely one of a kind. And it's been an honor to talk with you, talked about your career and your impact on CMF and in the community.
I sure appreciate your asking me, Scott. I've gotten to know you last few years, working on Words of Wisdom and working in our church.
Yeah.
You're a special person.
Thank you. Well, it's good to have you here.
Thanks.